Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the show this evening. Now for this particular episode, I'm going to be doing something very different with something most of you already know. We're going to be working on a very simple omena or daga, and we're going to be using some very different unique ways to incorporate, and we're of course going to bring out a very different look that some of you may not of course have seen before. But before I begin, I'll of course introduce the ingredients just to give you an idea of what to expect for this show. Now from the very front, you'll require about 2 tablespoons of cumin powder, a few garlic cloves and some fresh mint leaves. You'll also require about 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar or regular vinegar, about 1 tablespoon of some mayonnaise, and about 1 teaspoon of some dried oregano. You're also going to require about 2 whole lemons, 1 piece of onion and 1 piece of tomato just to make a simple salad. You'll also, of course, also require about 1 cup of daga or some sun-dried omena. You'll also require some flour, which we'll be making or mixing into a butter. About 1 cup of yogurt, plain yogurt will do for this recipe. And you'll also require some fresh cucumber, some fresh coriander leaves, some salt and black peppercorns for seasoning, some paprika powder, some soda water, and last but not least, some oil to cook with. But before we begin, we will take a very short break, and we'll catch you after a very little while. Welcome back, viewers. If you're just tuning into the show, as I mentioned, we're going to be bringing a very beautiful twist to a very simple ingredient that most of you already know, which is omena or sun-dried daga. And now we're going to start this very simple process by me introducing some of the basic things that you will require as well while preparing this. So very importantly, always have a sieve that you'll be using to sift your flour. And of course also have some parchment paper or some kitchen towel that will aid you in draining your omena once it comes out from the oil. Also be very vigilant to make sure that you have some oil already boiling or already on the heat before you begin the process, because you will of course need this to cook for a very little while in some oil. Now as we begin, you'll definitely begin by sifting your flour into a mixing bowl. And this is basically just to remove all those little lumps of flour. And once that's done, we're going to also proceed to add the rest of our ingredients. And I will begin the simple process by adding to this about 1 teaspoon of cumin powder. Also proceed to add all of your oregano, dried of course. Proceed to also add about 1 teaspoon of paprika powder. This will of course do 2 things. It will give it a nice beautiful kick of spice, and it of course complements the color. Now very importantly, always remember to season your butter at this stage. Remember, your butter could actually be very bland, especially if you forget to season. So you can achieve this very simply by crushing in some black peppercorns, or you can also use some black pepper powder for that. And of course also add to that about half a teaspoon of some salt. And very simply, using a spoon, proceed to give your bowl a nice quick mix. Of course this is just to aid in making sure that your spices and your flour blend in together before you proceed to add your liquid. And of course, turning your bowl around continuously also aids in giving you a nice beautiful consistency and a more consistent mixture. All right, once done, very simply we'll proceed to add our soda water. So begin your process very simply by making a well at the center of your bowl, and this is very achievable by just moving a bit of your flour to the... Now once you've made a well, proceed to grab your soda water, or tonic water will also work for this recipe. Remember, the beautiful idea of using any particular carbonated drink is for the fact that it actually manages to give it a nice beautiful consistency, and it gives it a nice beautiful lightness. On alternative days, you can also sometimes use a bit of some beer. It will also give it a nice beautiful consistency as well. Now proceed to add your soda water, making sure of course to whisk as you do so, adding it in little amounts, making sure not to add too much in the beginning. And proceed to add your soda water in little amounts, right up until all of your flour is incorporated. And of course the consistency we are looking for should not be too runny. It should actually resemble almost a very, very thick pancake mixture. And of course be sure to always knock down and fold in the flour from the edges of your bowl, making sure to also go around the bowl a few times while turning around. Of course, paying attention for any particular lumps of flour that may not, of course, be mixed into your batter already. And of course, by the aid of using such bowls as clear bowls, or a big bowl will, of course, aid in making sure that you get a nice, beautiful working area, allowing you to get a very beautiful batter mixture. Right, proceed to add a little bit more just to thin down the mixture. And after mixing for about 6 to 7 minutes, you should actually be able to have a nice, beautiful running batter. Beautiful point to check with is always be able to do so. You can always be able to do so by using the ribbon method. And this is very simply achieved by lifting the mixture from your bowl, and you can attempt to draw some lines right over your batter, and that should actually be able to tell you that you should actually have enough liquid by this stage. Right, now once that is done, we're going to proceed to dust our omena. Remember, this is also a very, very beautiful way to make sure that your omena is beautifully coated. So we're going to proceed to add that into our bowl, and proceed to add about a tablespoon of some flour. And you can proceed to toss those very, very briefly. Of course, by tossing, this always allows for you to get a more even coating to your omena. Right, and once that is done, we're going to proceed to cook the mixture, or to cook our omena rather in the mixture. So of course you'll begin very, very simply by adding your omena into your bowl. And you can add about half of your mixture to begin with. And by using a spoon, proceed to toss your omena in the batter mixture. Of course, making sure that all of your pieces are coated in butter. And once that is done, you can proceed to begin to add those to your oil, making sure that it is hot by dropping one piece to begin with. And once you can notice that your oil begins to bubble very, very quickly, you'll of course be able to know that this is actually ready to proceed. And you can always begin by cooking about 1 or 2 pieces just to make sure that your butter will actually have a nice, beautiful crunch. So you're just going to toss that right up until it's got a nice, beautiful golden brown color. And once done, you can proceed to remove from the oil, making sure to drain the oil from the spoon before removing from the heat. And very simply proceed to do the same thing with the rest of your mixture. And while I do so, I will of course give you this chance to take a very quick break while we actually also reassemble our station. But please don't touch that dial. When we do come back, I'll be able to show you what this look like once they're fully cooked. And I'll also take you through a very, very simple process of plating and show you some very, very simple serving suggestions. So don't touch that dial. We'll see you in a little bit. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just catching up with us on the show, we've pretty much managed to cook most of our daga or our omena a little earlier. Before we took the break as well, I had mentioned that we will of course come back and I will take you through the process of finishing this off. So we're pretty much just finishing off the last few pieces. Of course, while we allow the pieces on the side here to continue to cool off. And you can be able to, of course, make this in a very, very short span of time. If you are, of course, looking at some beautiful and simple options that you can also be able to make some very, very simple appetizers for you or your family, then this may actually be one of the best options that you can go for, especially if you're looking at some beautiful options that you can be able to use that are particularly not meat or chicken based. Now, as we finish this off, we will of course proceed to the next step of the process, which is making our tzatziki, which is going to be the complementary sauce for this dish. But before we do so, proceed to toss those in the oil. Of course, by tossing them around, always make sure that you get a nice even color right through the process and that your fish is actually cooked through and the butter is also colored right and to the right color that you're looking for. So of course this will always proceed to cook for anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes on some low heat. You can of course be able to cook this in a deep fryer as well if you do have one, but if you're looking at saving time as well, you can of course also use a very, very shallow frying pan and you will of course be able to achieve the same consistency. Right, now once these are done, I'll just proceed to turn off the heat a little earlier. And as I finish off this, proceed to, of course, toss them very, very briefly, just, of course, to get that beautiful taint of brown. And once those are done, we'll proceed to remove from the heat and just allow them to drain very, very quickly before moving onto your bowl. Right, simple as that. Now, of course, this we can allow to sit at the back while we proceed with the rest of our ingredients. Now, we're going to be making a very, very simple sauce or rather very, very simple accompaniment to this dish. So I will, of course, begin by grabbing a peeler. And I'm going to begin by peeling my cucumber. So very, very simply, and something also to mention, remember you can use very, very different techniques to actually achieve a garnish with the same ingredients that you use for the dish. So I'm also going to be using some of this beautiful ingredient to use for my garnish. So I'm going to begin by pulling off some very, very thin slices. And you can achieve this by peeling very, very slowly from one end to the other. That should actually give you some nice, beautiful wafer thin slices. Proceed to turn over. And of course, always take the first bit out. And proceed to peel about 2 or 3 more slices. Simple as that. Now this you can of course proceed to discard. And now very, very simply, we're going to also proceed to marinate this just very briefly in a bit of vinegar. Remember, this will of course give it a nice, beautiful flavor. So all you need to do at this stage is add your apple cider vinegar to a bowl. And very, very simply proceed to add your cucumber there, pressing of course right to the bottom, and you can season that with a bit of some black peppercorns, and you can also allow those to sit on the side right up until you're ready to plate. But while you do so, you can proceed also to chop up some of your cucumber. So begin by cutting off the stem end, and very simply using a sharp knife, proceed to slice thin a bit of that beautiful green from the cucumber. And this you'll proceed to start by slicing very thinly into some julienne strips. Proceed to do the same for the other slice on the other end. And you can of course also reserve this. You can use it for garnish or even throw it into a salad a little later. But just to finish that off, proceed to julienne those. And then finish that off by chopping them very small. Now something to mention about a tzatziki sauce, very good alternative dip to appetizers or starters. Also very good option for those of you who cannot be able to consume any mayonnaise. It's also a very good alternative because you actually incorporate the use of yogurt, which doesn't of course contain eggs and is also a much healthier alternative. Right, on to the next item. So very simply proceed to add your pieces of cucumbers into a bowl. And we're of course also going to be incorporating a bit of some mint leaves. So I'm going to begin by pulling off about 4 or 5 leaves of some fresh mint. And this of course always gives that beautiful tainty flavor and a bit of sharpness to that plain yogurt, making it of course not as bland as you'd want it or you'd expect. Now proceed to chop that very finely, and also add that to your bowl. We'll of course season this with some salt. And very importantly, a bit of some lemon juice. So begin by slicing your lemon into half. And very simply proceed to squeeze the juice of half your lemon into your bowl with the cucumber and the mint. And the lemon actually brings a nice, beautiful, zesty finish to your tzatziki. Also gives it a nice, beautiful sharpness to be able to cut through the flatness of that butter that we used for the omena. And it also helps in making sure that you don't actually have that very strong fishy flavor and aroma once you've enjoyed this very simple appetizer. Right, so once your lemon juice is in, proceed to grab a small spoon and very simply mix that through. So we're basically going to allow that to infuse for very little bit, about 2 to 3 minutes. And then we'll of course proceed to make the very simple salad that we'll be using to plate. So I'm just going to begin to grab the plate that we'll be serving our dish on for the day. And very simply proceed to mix up all the other ingredients that you'll be using to enrich the flavor of your tzatziki, of course. So I'm going to be using this very simple device. This is basically a garlic crusher. This will also aid in giving a nice, beautiful consistency to your garlic. So proceed to squeeze 1 clove at a time. And this will of course be able to be achieved as well by using a pestle and mortar, if you of course don't have one of this in your home kitchen. Right, so once you've got about 3 cloves of garlic finely minced, proceed to clean the rest of your garlic from your garlic crusher. Proceed to add that to your bowl with your cucumber, mint and lemon juice. Give that a mix once more. And of course very handy also to mention, especially when mixing dips, very important to always allow it to infuse with a bit of that acid. Remember, the acid will of course give it a nice beautiful flavor. But of course, remember, this could actually split your yogurt very, very quickly. So be sure to probably use 2 bowls just to be able to ration out the mixture and build the sauce very, very simply. So into another small container, I'm going to begin by spooning over about 4 to 5 teaspoons of the plain yogurt. I'm also going to incorporate a very, very small pinch of some paprika powder. So very, very small pinch. Of course, remember, this is just to give it an appeal of color. Crush in some black peppercorns. Begin by mixing that through right up until you've got those beautiful streaks of red from your paprika powder. And of course, proceed to spoon about 1 whole tablespoon of your mixture, but of course always allowing it to drain very, very briefly, making sure of course not to add your lemon juice. Now proceed to mix that through. Simple as that. Now you can of course proceed to reserve the rest of your ingredients to use later. But now we'll of course take you to the last and final part of the dish, which is the plating. So I'm going to be making a very, very simple African salad or kachumbari salad, for those of you who know it by that name. And I'm going to begin by grabbing a bit of my fresh coriander leaves. Now this I'm just going to chop very coarsely. I'm also going to grab my red onion, which I'll begin by slicing into half. Of course, taking precaution to make sure that you don't incorporate any of your skin from the onion. Right, next up, proceed to core out the root end of the onion. And very, very simply proceed to chop that very, very thinly. Right, once that is done, very, very simply season very lightly with a bit of salt. This is just of course to take away the tanginess of the onions and of course to get rid of that very sharp raw onion flavor. And you can just mix that very, very roughly on your chopping board and discard the rest. Next, you can proceed to grab your tomato. And this I'm going to begin by just slicing off the edge. This is basically just for presentation purposes. Proceed to slice your tomato into half. And you can slice that half of your tomato into about 3 wedges. And this you can also proceed to salt very lightly. Remember, salt always brings a nice, beautiful sweetness to your tomatoes. And you can begin the process of plating by moving your tomatoes onto your plate. Proceed to top that with a bit of your coriander and your onion mixture. And of course, as I said, if you're looking at really bringing an appeal to any particular appetizers, always give a bit of emphasis in plating, because remember, a lot of your guests are always going to begin by eating the dish with the eyes, and what particularly looks visually acceptable and visually attractive will of course always also add a bit of kick to your dish and also bring a nice, beautiful kind of an appetite. So we're going to begin the next step of the plating by grabbing our daga or our omena. And this, I will begin the process by grabbing our cucumber, which we had pickled a little earlier. Toss that in the vinegar once more. Of course, always make sure to allow that to sit for anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. And very simply proceed to move your pieces onto your chopping board. And begin the process very simply by laying one slice over the other. And this will pretty much just going to roll out. So very, very simply, beginning from one end, you can grab and begin to roll those. Of course, holding them together. And you can pretty much place that right over your plate like that, allowing it just to fan open. Proceed to also place some very, very nice dollops of your tzatziki sauce onto your plate. And using a spoon, proceed to work your mixture almost right around the edge. And of course, just to finish off, proceed to grab your omena or your coated daga, and you can proceed to place those right over the cucumber slices. And of course, as you can see, brings a nice beautiful burst of color. And this of course will always be nice and appealing to your guests. So be sure to give a nice generous serving if you're going to be giving this to a big group. But of course, if you're serving it for just yourself, you can of course go crazy and make it as big or as small as you like. And just to finish that off, we're also going to be serving that with a bit of some fresh homemade mayonnaise. And also very, very importantly, when serving fish, always a good serving suggestion, a slice of lemon just to refresh your dish. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of this very, very simple dish of the day, which, as I mentioned, was some omena or some sun-dried daga with a very, very simple salad, a very beautiful tzatziki homemade sauce, and of course some mayonnaise to complement the dish. Now we have of course come to the last and final part of the show. I do thank you for tuning in this evening once again. And until the next episode, I will of course wish you a lovely week. But remember, you can also feel free to write back to us through our Facebook page. Do leave your comments, queries, or any particular suggestions that could help in making this show a little better. But for now, I will bid you farewell, God's blessings, and see you soon.